Hi, thanks everyone. My name's Damian Hadley. I'm a structural engineer. I am the director of a company called Cantilever. We've been around since 2010, so 13 years, mainly doing high-end residential construction. So that's kind of our forte. My passion is in the early design stages, so it's about choosing what materials to use in a building. So I've labeled this presentation, "What does the structure want to be?" Right? And I think that's the question that we ask in our office about every building that we engineer. You know, when you think about buildings, there's kind of some typical building types. So for example, there's high-rise buildings. And when you think about high-rise buildings, you're thinking that, you know, they typically have a concrete core, and that's the lateral stability element. And a lot of times in high-rise buildings, it's the structure which dictates the architecture, right? So the structure will be concrete core, perhaps everywhere in the world except maybe the US, where steel is big, has a concrete core, and it might have concrete columns and concrete floor slabs, post-tension concrete floor slabs. Nowadays, we're taking those buildings, still having a concrete core, but perhaps changing them to timber from a sustainability point of view. But that's kind of the building type. And when you're presenting with those buildings, you don't really ask the question about what the structure will be, because it's going to be something that we know. The other building type might be a Bunnings warehouse, like a single-story steel frame Bunnings warehouse. Everyone been to Bunnings? Look at the structure in there. They're steel portal frames that are braced. Right? Everyone knows what that is. If you're going to do a Bunnings warehouse, that's what you do. And there's variations of that, but that's what it is. Then the other one, the third one, is a timber frame building to AS 1684. AS 1684 is my best friend and perhaps my worst friend. It is an amazing code. You guys know AS 1684 at all? Timber framing code? Yep. So that's a typology as well. So we've got high-rise buildings, we've got Bunnings warehouses, we've got AS 1684 buildings, right? We don't live in any of those worlds. We live in a completely different world. And the completely different world we live in is one where there's no real typology for it, right? In other words, we're given a 3-story residential building, and the big question is, what does the structure want to be, right? That's the question that we answer, because it's not normally easy to decide what the structure wants to be. Right? So our job is to find out what the structure wants to be. And that's what I love. I love the journey that it takes to find out what that structure is. Of course, if you have off-form concrete in a 3-story building, we know what that is. But if you're coming with something else, especially brickwork, because brickwork's terrible structurally, right? So most people come to us with brick buildings, and we have to find another way to hold them up, because brick isn't good at holding itself up. So our big question is, what does the structure want to be? So the other thing about this is that when you open a magazine, let's open Houses magazine and look at a building, right? What you're seeing there is the final iteration of what is perhaps millions of iterations of the project, right? And I love that journey. You go through these iterations of the project and land on this final solution, right? And that's what you're seeing, right? Now, that's only one iteration. It's the iteration that we've landed on. But what's actually much more interesting, right, is all the other iterations that weren't chosen. And these are the journeys that I want to show you today, right? These are the journeys that I want to show you. It's not the final product, but it's how we got to the final product. And I actually think that's the most interesting part of my job. So when you think about anyone seen this before? Is this ingrained on your brain, right? So this is the typical, traditional methodology for choosing what the structure wants to be, right? We use these 3 criteria: cost, time, and quality, right? So cost is how much is the building going to cost, time, how long is it going to take to build, and quality is, well, what level of quality do we want? Do we want something to minimum Australian standards, or do we want something higher than that, right? Well, I'm here to tell you that that is fundamentally flawed, I believe, right? And the reason I have proof of this, right? Open up any newspaper and look at any infrastructure project in the world, right? All of them are over budget, all of them are over time, and all of them have questionable quality. So why the hell are we still using this criteria to judge our buildings? I have no idea, right? It's just fundamentally flawed. I just read a biography of Dusseldorf, Lend-Lease, Mr. Lend-Lease, and he said that, remember the corruption, the Royal Commission into Corruption in the Construction Industry was about collusion in the construction industry? Well, he talks about it in that book, and he basically says, listen, we believe we are the best quantity surveyors, estimators, and builders in Australia, right? And we have no idea what these things will cost. So why are we tendering on these projects, right? This is not the right way. So he introduced the idea of a D&C, right? So, okay, so it's one thing to say that this is flawed, right? It's another thing to come up with another criteria that we use to choose what the building wants to be, right? Now, I don't know what the answer is, right? And I'm looking around this room and saying, probably the answer will come from you, right? You need to come up with the new criteria, right? You are the new generation that's coming through that needs to, and I think there's hints around the place about what it would be, right? So I've had a go at what I think the criteria should be, and this is what we use for our criteria. And as I take you through these projects, I want to show you how we use our criteria to determine what the structure wants to be. And we call it responsible design, right? So forget about cost, we have no idea what that is. Forget about time, we have no idea what that is. Forget about quality, it's random, right? But we believe this is the criteria that we should use. And there's multiple dimensions to this, but I've basically chosen 4. Number 1 is materials, or materialization, and that is your choice of materials, using materials wisely, minimization, substitution, elimination. Like, do we really need to build anything at all? It's probably the best building we'll ever build, right? So, also, I'm not here to argue about whether concrete is better or worse than timber, is better than worse than steel. I'll let everyone else argue that, and they'll argue it forever. It's meaningless. It's a meaningless conversation that doesn't need to be had, right? I actually think that the choice of materials the wise choice of materials is a better conversation to have. So that's the material. The second one is durability. We talked about durability briefly before. How long do we want this building to last? There's a lot of places in the world that build their buildings for 6 months, right? And our Australian standards doesn't allow that to happen. Everything's got to be at least 50 years, effectively, right? Unless you're doing temporary works where you know it's going to last. No. So durability, I have this lovely banter with Elizabeth Farrelly about the aquatic centre at Green Square. Anyone know the aquatic centre at Green Square? Anyone read the Elizabeth Farrelly article on that? She criticized the use of concrete in that building, right? Saying, why don't we use timber? And I had a lovely banter with her about the fact that inside a pool, that is a very harsh environment, right? Probably the harshest environment that anyone will ever experience. It's full of chlorine. Actually, go to any pool that's 5 years old, and you'll see all the steel rusting, right? You know it's a harsh environment. And I argued with Elizabeth that concrete is probably a good material in this environment because it's likely the only building material that will last 50 years in that environment. So I'm not saying that concrete was the right decision. I'm just saying we've got to think about the durability when we think about these buildings and constructing these buildings. Third one is adaptability. So this one's pretty easy, and I think it's kind of in the regulations now. Think about the vacancy rate of all the offices in the city, right? And think about the housing crisis that we have, right? So converting those office buildings to residential buildings is a common thing. Look at the TNT buildings in Redfern. So I think there's regulations now about the fact that we need to be able to convert office buildings into residential buildings. Adaptability. The fourth one, I'm not going to go there. Regenerative design. I'm not an expert. I go to Caroline Pidcock for my expertise on regenerative design. Do you do regenerative design here? Yeah, it's about the fact that you shouldn't build buildings that are bad. You shouldn't build buildings that are neutral. You should be building buildings that contribute back to the environment, back to society, back to humanity. It's a handprint instead of a footprint. That's regenerative design. It's a big thing. So these are the criteria. So I'm going to take you through some projects and think about this, or I'll try to tap back into this criteria when I go through these projects. Anyone know this building? Ang House, Chen Chao Little. It's one of my first really high-end architectural projects that I did. I think it's one of Chen Chao Little's first high-end residential buildings. There's a balcony to the left. Cantilever is 3 meters. When I was given the original preliminary sketches from Chen Chao Little, I happily went away and presented my preliminary structural sketches back to Chen Chao Little. It consisted of a whopping 400 deep cantilevered beam in the floor. And Tony and Steph said, Damian, please, surely we don't need a 400 deep beam in the floor cantilevering. Are there any other options? And me, in my weird panicky kind of way, I said, I don't know. Well, what about some columns to hold up the end of the balcony? No, we don't want that. What about a truss? No, we don't want a truss. What about a beam in the roof and hang it? No, we don't want big beams in the roof. What about a strut down to the garden? No. And Tony turns to me and goes, stop. Did you say a truss? And that's where it went. It was one of the most extraordinary 30 seconds of my life. And at the time, I just thought it was normal. But now that I look back, it is one of the most magical moments in my career, was that 30 seconds of like panicking to try to find another solution. And I could not believe in my life that they would ever accept that a truss was acceptable. This is another building with Panov Scott. Anyone know this one? 3 by 2 is not 3 plus 3. So again, this was I actually had nothing. Andrew rang me up and said, Scott rang me up and said, Damian, can I meet you? I just want to talk about a new project. And I said, yeah, sure. He came in and presented a sketch which was this facade. And I said, okay, I get it. And he goes, what I want to do is I want to make those 2 bits of glass touch. Right? And I said, well, don't you need structure in there? So I originally had, I said, well, why don't we put a 125 SHS up the middle of it, right? And then pack it out. And he goes, well, just a second, the glazing is not going to touch. It's going to be like 600 mils apart. I want these bits of glass to touch. So this was more than 30 seconds. It probably took about an hour. And we slowly workshopped a solution where we've got 2 columns on the perimeter. We've got a beam across the top. And we've got a plate that hangs down from the beam. And then we've offset the transoms. And that is as close as we could get to get those 2 bits of glass to touch. So what I'm trying to do here is just show you the process that we go through, show you the workshops and the early decision-making process that we go to. So those are just 2 fun projects. But what I want to do now is go through 4 projects where I'll take you through what is almost the whole journey and show you about how we use our criteria, our responsible design criteria, to choose what the structure will be. The first one is the Balmain House with Andrew Burgess. This one's not built, it's actually in Land Environment Court, and it is slightly going to be a modified version of this. So these are the first 2 renderings I got from Andrew, and you probably can't see this, but I said to Andrew, so let me understand this. Have you rendered that in CLT? And he goes, yeah, but don't take that. I just wanted to see what it looked like at CLT, because when you explain biophilia, do you do biophilia at all? No, but when you talk about biophilia, it's really hard to sell biophilia, right? Really hard to sell, because as soon as you sell it, all they do is, I don't want to live in a sauna, right? That's what they see. And I say, no, but it's nature touching you. And you sit there and you go, this conversation is not going anywhere. It's very hard to describe. And he said, I don't want this to be, I just wanted to show the client what it meant to have CLT and say it's not a sauna. It could actually be really nice. But he said, forget that. What I want to do is I want to do what we called stage 0. So this is a special thing that Cantilever does, and what I enjoy and what we train in our office and what everyone in our office is kind of trained to do, and that's this decision-making process of what the structure wants to be. Andrew found out, this is the first project I did with Andrew. Andrew found out that this is what we do. He said, I love that idea. Let's work together on this project. So what we did, I didn't do it, but what we did was we gave them 3 options. Now, of course, there's many other options. When I put this on LinkedIn, everyone came up with all sorts of other ideas. Why didn't you do concrete? Why didn't you do steel, like gauge steel framing? Why didn't you do hybrids? Whatever. But these are the 3 that we kind of landed on for what we thought would be appropriate. And I want, please play along with me here for a second. So we've got timber framed, right? We've got structural steel and we've got CLT, right? I want you to choose which one you think we will build, right? And have a reason in your mind about why you're choosing that, right? It's no fun if you don't do this, so choose one. So who thinks this is going to get built as timber stick framing? All right. Who thinks this is going to get built as structural steel? Right? Who thinks this is going to get built as CLT? Yeah, there's a few of each, so no one, there's no, so, okay, I'm going to give you a little bit more information and see if you change your mind, right? I want to see if you change your mind. Because what criteria did you use to make that decision, right? You know nothing about this project, except the fact that Andrew rendered his original renderings as CLT, right? You know nothing. So what matrix are you using to decide which one? Well, I'm saying that it's not appropriate at this stage to make a decision because you don't have all the information, right? And honestly, I believe you've got to meet the clients and see what they're like, because that will add to the narrative of which one to choose, right? And I didn't know. I just presented these to Andrew and said, let's discuss each one and see the merits of each one, right? So I'm going to give you another tidbit of information. Almost all of Class 1 buildings in Australia, probably in the world, are built with timber framing, timber stick framing. Almost all of them. I'm going to say 95%. I don't know the number, but almost all of it. Why? Why? Why is all of this, why is most of the building stock in Australia built as timber framed? Anyone have any idea? Why?
Material cost.
Material cost. Excellent. Material cost, right? I think I don't know, but that's probably a good one. Any other ideas? Why? What about the fact that we've been doing the same thing for 200 years, right? Everyone knows how to do it, right? Who cares if it's more expensive? We just know what to do. There's no risk, right? I'm not saying that's the answer, but I'm just saying it's ingrained. The construction industry is so conservative that I believe that is probably the driving criteria. But I don't know. But material cost is a great one. I love the fact that you said material cost, not cost, but material cost. Because absolutely, look at the material cost. And remember, the steel frame has to have timber in there or something else in there as well, right? And look at the material in the CLT, right? Now, I love CLT, so don't get me wrong, but material cost of CLT is high, right? So let me give you another criteria and see whether okay, so anyone change their mind on what this will be? Anyone who chose the other ones are changing now to timber framing, right? I'll give you another bit of information I've hinted on as well. If we put these 3 jobs out to tender, every builder in Australia will do this one, can do this one, will tender on this one. So if you want to go into the world, which I hate, adversarial, contract, competitive tendering, right? That one will probably win. Do you know why? Because you'll get someone who will misprice it and it'll be dirt cheap and you can't resist but go to them, right? And you'll end up getting a really poor quality build, right? This is me throwing things out there, but anyway. So the quality becomes a big issue here, right? If you built an AS1684, again, I said I love and hate it. AS1684, if you built a building to AS1684 to minimum quality standards, you would be embarrassed by it, right? As a matter of fact, when you go and buy a project home, you have A, B, and C. No one ever chooses the C because it has 75 mil studs at 600 centers. The first thing they do is change the structure to something more than minimum Australian standard, right? Because it's very poor. Anyone changing their mind yet on what it is? Right? So almost every builder can do timber framing. Most builders could probably do steel. Very few builders could do CLT. And in fact, they'd probably engage a different builder to do this CLT install, which is common. Almost all of our buildings have a separate CLT contractor to do the actual CLT build, because it's very specialized and nuanced, right? And it can go in a day, right? This could get built in a day, probably 10 hours, so maybe a day and a half, right? This one, probably the same. This one, I have a lovely story about timber framing. Showed up on site, first day in a place at Drummoyne. I'm going to say it's not quite right. Names have changed for reasons. And I said to David, the builder, I said, David, we've got 2 options here. We can do timber stick framing or we can do CLT. What do you want to do? Single story, easy build? And he goes, listen, I don't know CLT. I'm going to do timber stick framing. And I said, but we can do the CLT in 1 day. Surely. How much is the timber framing going to cost? Oh, it'll be six weeks. But you could do it in a day. Oh, 6 weeks, I'm okay with that. 6 months later, I did my final inspection, and he was still hammering the 2 bits of timber together. Still hadn't finished 6 months later, and I said to David, I said one day, you said 6 weeks, and now you're at 6 months. Are you okay with that decision? He said the most bizarre thing back to me. He said, don't worry, we've allowed for it to be 6 months. Right? So here we are, we're embedding our inefficiencies in the construction. That makes no sense. This is why I love CLT. I mean, another reason why I love CLT is because you're guaranteed a high quality build. Right? You're guaranteed a high quality build.
So detailing is very important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's mass timber, it's over-engineered, yes, but it's just, and you will get good builders to do this. You could get anyone. My 10-year-old son could probably do. Think about 1684, right? It's a cookbook, right? If you know how to bake a cake, I can show you in an hour how to build a building with 1684. It's a cookbook, right? So I don't have to do anything. So let's turn this on its head. Forget everything that I've said, right? Let's turn this on its head. I'm Damian. I'm running an engineering company. We need to make money in order to survive, right? I want you to think about where I am, right? How much does it cost me as a company to engineer and document this, right? Remember, I can just point to the cookbook, 1684. I reckon I could do that in probably $500. The cost of me doing this, $500, I reckon. This, need ETABS, need a structural analysis, need a specialist structural engineer, probably $2,000 to do this, right? Any guesses on what the engineering cost and documentation of this is? Any guesses? Any guesses? $500, $2,000. What's the guess of this? Remember, there's no cookbook. There's no international standard. It's not a commodity, so every supplier has a different product, right? What do you think? All the connections would have to be done from scratch, right? I will be embarrassed to tell you how much the cost of that engineering is to do that building. It would be embarrassing. So our office has done now about 30 CLT houses, single residence houses, 30. We think we're the highest in Australia for single residence class 1 CLT buildings. I would start to cry if I understood how much engineering time I've put into putting those 30 documents together, right? Survey by Adam Jones at the Wood Solutions. You know Adam Jones? Wood Solutions guy. Now out doing a different thing. He did a survey of engineers, and I think he surveyed 5 engineering firms and said, for your first CLT build, how much engineering time did you put into doing it for the first time? The average was 500 unpaid hours.
So do you have that time for the construction?
Yeah, that's right. So do you know what people would say? Do you know what you should say to me? Damian, why do you even offer that as a solution? You're a fool. You're just going to get screwed. Well, don't tell them. Don't just delete that one. Leave it blank. Don't do something else there, concrete or something, right? Because you are guaranteed to lose money. So why would I present it as an option? And in fact, I believe that that's probably one of the biggest reasons why CLT isn't where it should be, right? It's because the engineers don't want to spend those 500 eye-watering hours, right, unpaid, to get to the point where they can produce the documentation, right? We need a cookbook. We desperately need a cookbook like AS1684 for CLT, right? Anyone? Please? Because we need it. CLT, mass timber won't be anything until that gets solved. It's a big problem. I spent a lot of time on this one slide, but I won't spend as much time on the others. I just thought this was fun. Anyway, so this building is getting built in a different form, but what do you think we've chosen? It's going to be timber stick framing. But Andrew, you know what Andrew said? Andrew said, Damian, I'm sorry, but I loved the process, right? I've been in this industry for 50 years. No engineer has ever presented this, right? So this is not normal. Engineers don't normally do this. They come in, remember, the traditional process, right, is architect-client, Act 1, structural engineer, Act 2, builder, Act 3, right? There's no buy-in previously. The client and architect at the very beginning own the project. We don't own anything. We just, okay, damn it, just do what I said. Like, we've got this. So anyway, that's the first project. Sorry, one slide, crazy. Next one is Annandale House. So this is with Welsh and Major. I don't know if you can see this, but this is the DA approval. And what you might notice from a structural point of view is that it's actually a large tunnel, right? So take a cardboard box and cut the two ends out of it, and let it go, put it on the ground, and let it go. What do you think would happen? Right, cardboard box, two ends cut out so it's open, you can see through it. What's it going to do? It's going to collapse, right? We call that lateral stability, right? Same thing happens in a house. There's no magic here, right? My cardboard box is the same as this building. I've got no return walls, right? So the whole thing is just going to collapse over, right? So we need a lateral stability solution. So me, being me, said, okay, David, I don't want to disrupt the architecture. I know you don't have any walls coming into the building. You just want straight tunnel. Here's a steel portal frame, right? Here's the original one with no return walls, no stability. Here's our solution, steel. And I said, okay, we'll put 4 steel portal frames in. And David, beautiful David, if you know David, if you know David at all, he said, are there any other options, Damian? So we went through a bunch of them, and we landed with, anyone know this house?
I saw it and I was wondering who it is. So that's good.
You might recognize it in a minute. So I said, well, what about, and just as I love to do, I just kind of threw these things out. What about block walls? But they're going to eat into the space, David. Surely you don't want these, like, you've got a narrow, surely you don't want your space narrower. So I introduced the idea of block work, right? There they are. Ended up winning the highest residential architectural award in 2017, right? David just totally embraced it. Look what he did. I was like, David, are you serious? You're going to put block walls inside the space? But there it is. So you never know, right? I don't know that anyone else would have offered this block wall solution, right? Because you don't want to be controversial. But it's amazing what happens when people engage with it. Next one is the Waterfront. This is the Waterfront Tavern. Won the big gong at the Timber Design Awards this year. Anyone been down to Shell Cove? Beautiful building right on the water, man-made lagoon, blah, blah, blah. So this is the tavern. You'll see it in a minute. This is the tavern. This is the town center, basically, which is a pub, of course. So the inspiration of the architectural narrative is a boat shed, right? Timber framed. So the architectural narrative is a boat shed. Would love the structural narrative to be a boat shed as well, right? There's no steel in a boat shed. It's all timber framed, right? So here we are. Love timber. We have a timber first policy. So these are the renderings. I'm foreshadowing here, by the way. I don't know whether you picked that up, but anyway. Completely open, operable doors. Beautiful place to be.